Well, I should say welcome to the people that will be watching this online. It's been recorded, and welcome to all of you. If you're wondering what this white box is, it's empty. And if you're wondering why we have our own personal thunderstorm upstairs, the opera company holding auditions, and they're in the hall above. So that said, I'd like to share with you some thoughts that are focused around pride, but also about our place in the church. And I'll talk about these pictures that you'll see shortly. The celebration of pride, whether it's a parade, a festival, or simply a service like this, is important to me ever since I came out. Indeed, in the 1981 Pride March, that's the top left, which was actually the London Pride March, but because the Gemini Club in Huddersfield was raided by the police, they decided to move the entire London Pride to Huddersfield. And because I was pastor of a Pentecostal church in London, and going to London Pride was too much, going to Huddersfield, hooray, I can be free. And my friend told me, oh, we'll be back in plenty of time. But we got back at 7:30 on Sunday morning, and I had a 10 o'clock service. So, but that simple, and I'm somewhere between the MCC banner and the LGCN banner. So, but that event was a catalyst for my coming out publicly and eventually leading the church. So I've been a minister in a Pentecostal church since 1978. And it was a church that I've been in from the day I was born. But in 1978, I also came into contact with the gay Christian movement, and soon after that, Metropolitan Community Church. And I'd already begun by this time a discernment to be an ordained priest in the Church of England. But neither the Pentecostals or the Anglicans would allow me to be myself, and therefore prevented my passion and compassion to reach out to the lesbian, gay, bisexual community. So 6 months after this Pride March in Huddersfield, I walked away from traditional church. And the communities I left behind, but they considered me lost. But in reality, not only did I find my authentic self, I found a community that I could work with and one that loved me. Of course, in 1981, some of you will remember, was the first AIDS diagnosis. And in 1982, I burst onto the LGBT scene to become a pro-gay Christian activist. But much of the church back then was either fearful or hostile. But there were a few Christian communities that opened their hearts and who worked side by side through the AIDS crisis. And after 6 years on the London scene, I moved to Manchester to work with what was then Healthy Gay Manchester and to start an inclusive Christian fellowship. And slide 2 and 3, top right was the first Pride store that we held in Manchester at the, well, it was then the Village Festival, now it's the Pride Festival. And bottom left slide was our first Pride service during the Pride weekend. And we were just a small group, probably by that time 15, 20 people. But there was this amazing swell of acceptance because we were willing to be involved in the middle of particularly the AIDS struggle that the community was going through. I moved to North America in 1995, and having been offered opportunity to work full-time with predominantly LGBT churches. And And in many ways, that was a dream come true. This little gay boy from Northamptonshire suddenly had this opportunity to go to America. And I worked in Florida and in the Midwest and in Ontario, Canada. So the bottom right, our church was asked to be parade grand marshal. And because I was the pastor of the church, me and one of our members, that's us in the Pride Parade car. And normally they had big floats or big cars, but the Fiat 500 had just been introduced to North America. So we were actually in a tiny Fiat 500 with a rollback roof. North America has a much stronger Christian culture, both conservative and progressive. And therefore, I find I was welcomed by some universities and served as chaplain to LGBT students at University of Florida, and frequently was able to be at the forefront of Pride events. I remember well the bombing of the World Trade Center 24 years ago last week. I was at the gym, actually, and that in itself was a memorable occasion. But in the weeks that followed 9/11, people across America came together, prayed together, put many barriers aside. But sadly, within 3 months, the harmony and unity had disappeared and life returned to how it was, but with heightened suspicion of neighbors. The gathering together was actually about self-preservation in the face of our enemies. That was in the face of those who were different. And I believe that event was the core of the America that we see today. Because if you compare that with the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando 2017, there was a very different response. 49 people were killed, 53 were injured, but we were a community standing alone. Much in the same way that in 1969 in New York, in the Stonewall riots, we were a community standing alone. Last week was Derby Pride. And that has nothing to do with being proud of Derby, but rather to celebrate the diversity that every city should have in the celebration of LGBT identity and diversity. And at a time of increased negative focus, it's important to remind ourselves that Pride Week also comes out of tragedy. Many years of constant oppression against gay and lesbian people, bisexual and transgender people, by politicians, by police harassment, and by brutality. That's what led to the Stonewall riots, which is what the earlier Prides commemorated. And the church is a broker of God's love. But because we choose too often law over love in our interpreting scripture, the church doesn't have open arms and stands back from supporting those most in need of love and acceptance. But Pride is a celebration of freedom. And however you identify, it's a recognition of your right to be you. You know, Jesus said, I am come that you might have joy and have it more abundantly. That it means a constant and ecstatic joy all the time. So I wonder how the early Christians thought about that when they were being prepared to be lions' food by the Romans. Yet Paul says, consider it joy even when you are persecuted. There are a number of parables in the Gospels about being lost. And if we hear what they say, then it's a good thing to be lost. Because there's abounding joy in heaven when you're found. But also, if we've never been lost, we probably don't experience the fullness of God. Sometimes we simplistically feel that God's fullness is an emotional rush in a worship service or a crowd-packed religious festival. But the fullness of God is to be found in the emptiness of life. The history of the Bible is an epic of God seeking the lost. The creation narratives tell us how humans and God once had perfect communion, which became severed because of fear. Both the human and the divine have this eternal desire that paradise lost be re-established. But believe me, from my 70 years of being in and around church, it's actually very easy to be lost in church. Lost because of the things that were dear to us are no longer available to us. We've been told we can't do this or we can't do that. Lost because of misguided attitudes that would oppress us or even reject us. So we're never fully ourselves. We wear our Sunday masks. Lost because we feel there's no one here who's like me. But so many people who become regarded as spiritual inspirations have talked about their own dark night of the soul. Mother Teresa spoke of times when the impoverishment of people in Calcutta was just so overwhelming, and in the midst of it, she struggled to believe in God. Yet her darkness did not stop her working for hope. And often it's fear that keeps us from being fulfilled. It's one of the great enemies, for it has the power to immobilize us, possibly more than anything else. It's fear that holds us back. In the dark, we're afraid of the dark. In isolation, in wide open spaces, lost on a desert island, standing at the foot of a roller coaster, when your partner says, "Come on, you've got to do this, it's wonderful." I'm not going on. Fear of coming out to our families, fear of moving to a new area, fear of taking a better job, of acting for justice or good, fear of helping a stranger in distress. It's fear that holds us back. You know what? We often perceive Jesus as confident and in control, but if Paul's description of him is correct, then he was more than God in human form, because he took on the form of a slave, which means he suffered all the fears, or the anxieties, or the prejudice of being a slave would bring. But we heard in that reading from John that love is the key to overcoming fear. Perfect love casts out fear, even where roller coasters are involved. The traditional view was that John the Apostle and the beloved disciple is the one who wrote this letter. He was the one who was recorded as being intimate with Jesus, albeit that he wrote that himself. He was the one to whom Jesus gave the care of his mother. So if that's so, if that's truly who's writing this, someone who understood intimate love in that context, then those words we hear has to be even more powerful. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God lives in them. If you ever need a scripture to combat people who are trying to put you down, that's the one. For much of my ministry career, I preached against the gospel of sameness. Because especially in America, in these big churches, there's this message, come and be like us, and then we can love you. But Jesus said, come as you are. You're welcome as you are. And if change is needed, those decisions are up to you to make after you have experienced God in community. My best friend lives in Colombia. Over the years that we've known each other, he's become like a son to me. But when we met, I asked him about faith and church, and he said this: I read the Bible through twice, and what I read didn't match my experience of church, so I decided to leave church. It was his faith that makes him a Christian, not his association with church. But the church is commissioned to bring good news of inclusive love. We can't just tell a story. We have to live it. Matthew 5:23 says, you bring your gift to the altar, and then remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Pathway to unconditional love is through forgiveness, our willingness to forgive. It's Jesus who says, come to the party. It's Jesus who says, for every person who was lost and is found, there's a party in heaven. It was Jesus who welcomed the outcast, the different, the unacceptable, the misunderstood. And then in the same way that Moses changed God's mind about the Hebrew people, so Jesus is in the process of changing God's mind about all of us. And that's the reason to party. And if we can just grasp that, then church might be a party and not just a ritual. And thankfully, people have stood up time and again and said, let's party for freedom. So when people say to you, pride has had its day, or pride should be banned, you need to say that you don't believe them. But while people are still in fear, still in closets, someone has to invite them to the party. The song clip we're going to listen to is actually probably my favorite song, sung by my favorite performer from my favorite TV series, Pose. So this is Billy Porter.